All right, so let's talk about, of course, we're going to talk about workplace bullying. That's all I talk about, it seems. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about workplace bullying, and let's talk about how you respond, because that I think is super important. And one of the things, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm a realist, and I feel like the best way to deal with what's happening to you is to understand the nuances, so to speak. And I'm a realist because I think that's how you best prepare. There's not a magic solution. There isn't a one size fit all. If you do this, then this will happen. The reality is when you're dealing with workplace bullying, everybody's experiences are different. You're asking, well, why is that? Well, your bully is different. How people bully is not the same. They don't all yell, they don't all swear, they don't all engage in, um, you know, um, rumors or those kinds of things. Excuse me. Do bullies have very similar MOs? Of course they do. But every bully is different. It depends on your organization. How many bullies do you have? Do you have more than one person being bullied? There's all these kind of nuanced um, experiences, and so everybody who's being bullied has a different experience, and so therefore there's not a one size fit all. What I can tell you is that there are often similarities between people who are being bullied, and oftentimes how you respond is one of those similarities. If that makes sense. So for example, excuse me, one of the things people have a tendency to do is they don't realize that they're being bullied for maybe a chunk of time, and they've done all these things that they would do under normal conflict types of behavior, right? You report, you go talk to the person, and when those things don't work and they make it worse, oftentimes if you're the person being bullied, you just don't know what to do. And that's okay. You're in a situation, if you're being bullied, you're not in a normal everyday workplace, and so you don't know what to do because you're not prepared to deal with this type of behavior. However, let me just preface this, is if you are in nursing where bullying is rampant, if you're in education where bullying is rampant, right, what educators ought to be doing is preparing students to go into those two careers to deal with bullying. But here's the problem with that, is often where bullying starts is in academics, because higher education has bullying and your faculty might be bullying you. So there's the problem, and that's one of the reasons we're not preparing students, is because the very profession you're going into, and when you get into that and you get accepted into that major, those faculty are bullies. Okay, so generally it takes a chunk of time for you to understand that you're being bullied. You've probably already done some of these quote unquote normal interventions that don't work. So what do you do? What is really the best response for workplace bullying? The best response, and really this is a person who's being bullied, you have a little kryptonite in your pocket. It's choosing a path to respond that takes the wind out of a bully's sails. So when you strategize and you choose to respond differently instead of in the moment, that's really your kryptonite, right? Yes, that's right. I'm making a Superman reference since I know that Superman is out. So you can't just go into bully culture without strategizing how you should respond. So for example, when a bully gaslights, and generally bullies have a tendency to gaslight, right? They want you to um, question your own stories. They want you to think that you yourself are not credible, right? They say, don't believe the things that you're seeing. That's gaslighting, and bullies, generally 9 times out of 10, I might even say 10 out of 10, bullies gaslight. Because if you question what's real, then they've won the battle. So you have to have strategies to deal with gaslighting. You have to have strategies to deal with somebody if your bully changes the rules on you. So your documentation is really the foundation to any strategy. Again, because if you know when you're being bullied, how you're being bullied, and when you're most vulnerable, then you can deal with the bully more effectively. Okay, so that means you have to document. I know, I feel like a broken record. You have to document. And not only do you need to document, you need to actually review and assess and look at what it is that you're documenting. So that means that you need to have a good system where you can look at those things that are happening. And ideally, you want a system that counts how many behaviors you're experiencing, where it's happening, and who's doing it. So again, so let's say, for example, you've been documenting for the last 3 weeks. You know that your most vulnerable times, again, I want to clarify this for you. It's when I say most vulnerable, I'm not saying that you deserve to be bullying. What I'm saying is there are times and periods when you are going throughout your work day or your work week where you might be more at risk to be bullied. That might be because you're in a team meeting and there's everybody is there. It might be when you have shared in shared locations, right? Like in the hallway or at your coffee, maybe there's a break room, right? Those are times where you're more likely to be bullied, which means then you need to focus on those times and strategize when you're most likely to be bullied. So for example, if you're going to be bullied in the break room, or that's a vulnerable time for you, maybe you try to take your break where by yourself, or where Bob your bully isn't in the break room, or you go into the break room a little before everybody else does. You grab your coffee and then you go take your break somewhere else, right? So you reduce then by changing up when you take your break, you're reducing the time that you're vulnerable or where you're in that break room with everybody else. Is that fair? No, it isn't fair. But you're trying to strategize to reduce the times that you're being bullied. The reality is the workplace that you're in isn't fair, and you're trying to do a better job of dealing with the bully, right? You're trying to, dare I say, outsmart them. And one of the ways that you do is looking at when you're being bullied, where is it happening, and then you strategize to better deal with that. So another example might be, let's just say, again, you can't, unfortunately, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to not see your bully, right? If you're being bullied at work, it's likely that could be happening with your boss, which of course makes it more complicated, but not impossible, okay? Just because something is complicated and difficult doesn't mean that there's not a solution or a better way to deal with them. So let's say, for example, it is your boss, right? So you do have to have probably one-on-one meetings with your boss. You probably have to have meetings where everybody is in that meeting, and those things make it more complicated for you to deal with your bully, okay? But again, not impossible. What it means is that your strategy and how you deal with them is more complicated. So the first strategy that I recommend everybody learn how to do is to keep in control. To stay grounded is really what that is, right? So how do you stay grounded in a meeting where you have 6 people, engaging in gaslighting and bullying you? Well, that takes a little bit, again, more work on your part. It requires more grounding strategies. So maybe you deep breathe, right? And it's not that you're just engaging in deep breathing, it's that you're focusing on your breath so that you stay in control. That's really what grounding is a mechanism or a tool that you're using to keep yourself in control, right? So you deep breathe. Maybe you sing the lyrics to your favorite empowerment song, right? Like I would recommend Um, I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty. That's one of the things I used to go over in my head. And I would think those words in my head to keep myself in control. Okay, I think I've told you before too that I would take I don't have fingernails, right? But I would take my fists and just, clench them enough that I could feel my fingernails on my skin, just like that, right? Not that I'm hurting myself, but that I'm focusing on that area while I'm clenching my fingers to stay in control. That's what grounding is. It's just a mechanism or tool and or tools. I recommend you have more than one. A way for you to stay in control, because that's key. Really, grounding techniques and grounding has to be the foundation of every strategy, because if you can't stay grounded or stay in control, then the bully wins, because they like the reaction. They want to see you uncomfortable, and by staying grounded, you're taking that away from them, and you're, oh, dare I say, outsmarting them. Okay, so let's say, for example, that one of the things that happens when you have your weekly meetings, whether that's a team meeting or whatever it is, you have a meeting where your bully is there and they go after you. They have people or your colleagues, or dare I say minions, that do their bidding, and they jump on the bandwagon, and you have several people who come after you in meetings. So it's super important that you have more than one grounding mechanism, because it's likely that you'll go through one, then you'll move to another one, and then you might even move to another one. So you have several grounding techniques in your backpack or your toolkit that you use to stay in control. Okay? And I even recommend, when things get super tense, because it's not will they, it's when, that you have exit strategies, that you can maybe get out of a meeting, take a quick break, etc. Again, I've told you before, I'm diabetic, and I would use, oh, I forgot my lifesavers or my glucose tablets. I'm just going to run back to my office and grab those. Okay? And again, it wasn't maybe that I needed glucose tablets. Maybe maybe my blood sugar was low. What I'm using that time for is to get myself grounded, to figure out, okay, I need to go back into that room. I've got 5 minutes, or I'm going to walk to my office. I'm going to grab some glucose tablets. Yes, I'm going to take those. And I'm going to think about how I'm going to deal with what I know is going to happen when I walk back into that room. And that is, I have 6 people who are going to be bullying me. What am I going to do? Again, so I think about my strategy. I get myself back in control, and I go back into that room. But what are you going to do when you go back in there and you're going to be gaslit, and you have 5 people who are going to be, basically piggybacking on the bully and are going to be coming after you? So you're going to, again, always stay grounded, always stay in control. And then you're going to use, maybe you don't say anything, right? Silence is a good tool. You don't have to always engage back in the back and forth with the bully, because that is one of the things they do is, Bob will say something, and then, Betty the bystander will say something. And when you have one bully and then you have a bystander who engages, the goal is always the same: to hurt and harm you and to get you to react. So the less time you react and engage in that back and forth, the better it is for you. And how you engage in that back and forth is critical. So let's say, for example, Bob is, criticizing you, and Bob is telling you, how worthless you are and that you're not a good employee, and etc., etc. Okay, those are all hurtful things. Okay, but in the moment, what you want to do is take the wind out of Bob's sail and not respond. So when Bob says you're worthless, when Bob says the intern is better than you are, how you respond is critical. So you can respond in silence. And again, silence is not an easy strategy. It's an effective strategy. So learn how to be uncomfortable in the silence. Again, count to 100. Again, say your affirmations in your head, because one of the things that we know that definitely happens when there is silence is, time seems to shut down and slow down. So you want to, your strategy is to live in the silence and, have the silence happen for longer periods of time than for 2 seconds. So you want to make sure, again, time slows down. It seems like, minutes and minutes and minutes have gone by when it's really been a couple of seconds. So your strategy is silence, and how can you make that silence last longer? So another strategy for you, again, is to make sure that you count, that you, again, go through your grounding techniques, and you make sure that the silence isn't 2 seconds, but it's 2 minutes. Because you want Bob and Betty to experience the silence, and in order to do that, you have to have the silence last. So you have to develop strategies, right? Silence is your strategy. How can you make sure it lasts more than 2 seconds? Is by staying in your own head and not engaging in the silence when it becomes uncomfortable. And you can see Bob and Betty squirming in their seats. And actually what you do is, when you see Bob and Betty squirm, that should be empowering to you to know that silence is working. But silence alone isn't a strategy. Again, there's not a one size fit all. When I'm talking about planning and strategizing, I'm talking about thinking about having 10 strategies in your toolkit that you can move to, right? So if you're using silence, you've already, strategy 1, staying grounded, probably gone through more than one staying grounded technique, okay? Silence is a strategy, but then how do you make the silence last? You have strategies to keep yourself silent. So you've gone through several strategies just to even get to silence. But then let's just say Bob responds and he ratchets it up. So they know, right? Bullies will pick up on the fact that you're strategizing, and then they're going to ratchet up the harm and hurt. So maybe Bob, nudges Betty, and she goes for the jugular, so to speak, and she comes at you with, well, look, I happen to have your report right here, and don't mind all the red marks, and I'm going to pass this out. Oh, and I've got copies for everybody. We'll use this as a learning moment, right? So then they ratchet up the harm and hurt. Then you have to have more strategies. How are you going to deal with Bob and Betty when they have red mark the holy bejesus out of your report? Okay? Well, you're going to say, thank you for the feedback. Again, I think this is great that we can use our reports as a learning tool. I can see that mine is here. Who's going to be next, right? Will have your report. Can we get that in the minutes, Betty? That John will use his report next time. Since, right, one of the things that you said was, this is a great learning opportunity, and how we learn is to pull everybody's apart. So let's make sure that John gets on the schedule for next week. And so then what you do is you take that time where they're pulling your report apart, to talk about the things in your report that are factual, that are truths, right? And you talk about, and then you just listen again. Don't respond to their feedback with anything but what, again, I'm a big fan of microscripts. So you have a set of neutral ones, just like, okay, that's interesting. Maybe even you say that, I can see where your feedback in my report will be beneficial, and I can take those things into consideration when I'm writing my next report. You don't have to respond and say, and defend yourself and say, I can't believe that you're, pulling my, report apart, but you can say thank you, right? Oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll consider that. That's something to think about. Right? All of those are responses, but they're basically neutral and non-responses. So when you say something like this, which I think is very beneficial that you should put in your toolkit, is when you say, I'll take that into consideration, what you're basically saying is, yeah, I've heard your response. I can see that, okay, it's interesting, but I'll think about it, right? So you're basically saying, okay, and when you say I take it into consideration and or I'll think about it, you're thinking about it, you're telling them that you're going to consider it. It doesn't mean that you've agreed to do it. It means that it's a consideration. The other really good thing is when dealing with somebody who in gaslighting, one of the strategies that I recommend is that whenever somebody says something like Bob, who's your boss, who tells you that they want you to do, right, they want you to alphabetize your clients by 6 o'clock, when they tell you that in the hallway, in that shared space, what you then do is go back to your office and you send Bob an email. Hey, it was great to see you in the hallway. Here's what you said. I'm just confirming, right? So then you have done two things. You've confirmed with Bob that you saw him in the hallway, that he changed the rules on you, and you're confirming how they changed. Bob changed the rules, which is instead of, just doing your client list like you've always done it, which is by date, Bob wants you to alphabetize. You've confirmed that change of rules in an email. So that when Bob comes and you've alphabetized your client list, which is different than the norm, you can say, well, Bob, I saw you in the hallway at such and such a time. I confirmed in an email. You said, yes, that's the way I want it. I have your email. Right? So I have it in writing that you changed the rules when I saw you in the hallway at 3:30. I went back to my office, confirmed to, again, your change of rules via an email. You confirmed and responded back with, yes, that's what I want. And so that's what I did. Right? So you use their gaslighting, and you always follow up with their change of rules in an email so that you have a paper trail. I recommend, not even for people, not for if you're in a healthy work environment, that when somebody changes the rules, right, and they do it verbally, you always go back to your office and follow up with an email so that you have, for your documentation, have a paper trail. So the thing is, again, the strategy in kryptonite that you have in your power is that you understand how you're being bullied, and then you develop strategies, not a strategy, but you have several strategies in your toolkit to deal with Bob, your bully, and Betty, the bystander. So if we just want to recap, right, all the strategies that we've done, right, you have several grounding strategies to stay in control. That's key to a good strategy. And don't just do deep breathing, because Bob and Betty will be poking at you to make sure that you lose control and they see you squirm. So you have several grounding strategies that you can go through when you find yourself becoming less in control. You move up to a bit more advanced grounding strategy. And again, I don't recommend that you come in and you have 20 grounding strategies. I recommend you're already probably doing grounding strategies. You just haven't labeled it as that. So not only are you going to document, but what are you doing to counter the bullying, right? So also keep, again, tomorrow when you go into work, I want you to do a couple of things. I want you to make sure you're starting to document and have a consistent way to do that, and have a consistent way that you can actually look at the documentation so you can understand what's happening to you. My throwing stuff in a Rubbermaid container or a digital file is not an effective way because I didn't have a way to retrieve it. I didn't have a way to look at it. So I want you to get a system, right? So even maybe you just go into Excel and you say date and time, location, who's involved, who was a witness, here's the details, here's what I experienced, and that's it. That's perfect, right? Because you can go into your Excel spreadsheet and just keep a running log, right? Here's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, okay? And then you can go in there and look, maybe on Fridays before you check out of your workday, is you just go through your Excel spreadsheet, which is not on your work computer, but it's in your own personal, maybe it's on your phone or whatever it is. It's on a personal device, not a work device, okay? And then, so that's the first thing you do. And again, keep track of what it is that you're doing, how you responded. Is that working? Is it not working? So if we, again, to backtrack, you have grounding techniques that you use, not 1, not 2, probably 10 or 15, okay? And advance those, right? Start from minor, so start with deep breathing, start with counting, start with going through, Tom Petty in your head, start with, again, focusing or clenching your nails into your, fist, right? And focus on that, and then you have more advanced ones. Then you have silence. And in your strategy of silence, silence is and not engaging. So if you don't want to call it silence, it's that you're choosing not to engage when they're coming after you. But then you have to have a way to expand the silence, because what we have a tendency to do is when we use a silence as a strategy is we forget that time stands still, and we need ways to, make sure that the silence is not 2 seconds, it's a minute, it's 2 minutes. Then you have to have a strategy of how are you going to know how long it's been? Well, counting is a great way to do that, because if you're up to 300, that's about 3 minutes probably. And we're generally counting faster, so the time is going faster than we think it is. And so you have more strategies to make sure that the silence has a sting, because it's lasted longer than 2 seconds or 30 seconds. It's lasted 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And in order to do that, you have to have another strategy. Then you have a strategy where when Bob tells you or changes the rules, your strategy then is to follow up with in written form. And that's not just following up to follow up, that's to follow up and say, you know what, Bob? When Bob comes back at you and yells at you in the team meeting that you changed how you submitted your client list, it was alphabetized and not by date, what you can then do is to take those emails and just say to Bob, again, because you're staying grounded, and you calmly say, neutral microscripts. I hear you, Bob, right? Using the sandwich method. Yeah, okay. I appreciate the feedback, a neutral compliment. But Bob, you told me when we were in the hallway to alphabetize my list. You changed the rules on me, and I responded up in an email, and I have that if you'd like me to send that to you. And you confirmed that, yes, you wanted me to not send my client list by date. You wanted me to alphabetize it, and I did that. I confirmed that in an email, and that's why I submitted. Again, I appreciate the feedback. This is a great learning opportunity. Compliment number 2, you've sandwiched it. So you have several strategies that you've used to shut down Bob, your bully. And the reason that you seem exhausted is because responding that way with a plan and a strategy and not just reacting takes a lot more energy. But the thing about planning a strategy is pretty soon these things will come second nature. You'll just be responding that way, and not necessarily thinking about it. Until these things become second nature, your responses, your kryptonite strategy for Bob the bully to shut and outsmart Bob, soon these things will become second nature, right? As soon as Bob says something to you and criticizes you, what you're going to be doing is, okay, interesting. And you're going to be automatically going into your grounding techniques. You're going to be using your micro scripts, your neutral scripts. You're going to be counting to 200 or 300 or 400 in your head. They're going to become second nature. And that's exactly what you want, because then what you're doing is you're not reacting to Bob. You're using strategies to outsmart Bob, and soon those things become second nature. And that's exactly what you want. And the thing about the strategies we talked about today is those are such good strategies, and they should be used in a healthy workplace or in a toxic workplace and in a bully culture. And what you do when you respond to Bob strategically is you're not only taking back your power, because what you're going to see is Bob's uncomfortable when there's silence. Bob's uncomfortable when you're using his own words against him. Bob is going to be the one squirming, not you. And so all of these strategies that, yes, take time to plan, in the end become second nature to you, make you a better professional, and you're going to see that you are powerful and that you have outsmarted Bob with the very game Bob and Betty have played. And that's the plan, is that you become smarter than Bob. And I recently have uploaded onto my website, my shop at Stop Bully Culture, a resource for you called Outsmart the Workplace Bully. And some of the things that we've talked about today, documenting a very exceptional ways to document, how to do it fast and easy, and how to respond, and lots of other strategies of how you can respond to Bob that outsmart them and put you ahead of the game. So make sure you go check that out. It's at shop.stopbullyculture.com. If you go to my website, stopbullyculture.com, the shop link is right there at the top, and that resource will be right there for you. And it will make you more powerful, and it will put you ahead of the game, whether you're working in a bully culture or a regular, healthy, quote-unquote, healthy workplace. All right, so if you have any questions, of course, you can always send those to Jan at stopbullyculture.com, and I will see you next time.